Hey guys, in this brief introductory lecture, I'll be discussing transformational generative grammar. I'll be introducing the concept of transformational generative grammar. Now, transformational generative grammar is also known by the name TG grammar. So please don't confuse it with traditional grammar, because that's a mistake. That's a common mistake that almost all literature students do when they write their exams. That is, whenever they are asked to write about traditional grammar, they immediately write TG grammar instead of traditional grammar, and vice versa. So the thing is, this is a tool used by the structuralist, whereas, as you know by now, traditional grammar was something that was used by the ancient grammarians. So there is a clear difference between the two. So transformational generative grammar is a short form, has a short form, and the short form of transformational generative grammar is TG grammar. Please bear that in mind while you listen to this lecture. Now, transformational generative grammar as a concept was first introduced by Noam Chomsky in his book Syntactic Structures, which was published in the year 1957. So this is yet another concept which was introduced by Noam Chomsky. Remember, phrase structure grammar was also a concept that Noam Chomsky talked about in his syntactic structures, because since phrase structure grammar originated as a process of, as a modification of IC analysis, you cannot attribute phrase structure grammar to Noam Chomsky. But transformational generative grammar as a new concept was introduced by Noam Chomsky in his book Syntactic Structures, which was published in the year 1957. And this was the most influential, and this is considered as one of the most influential of all linguistic theories. So it was like a path-breaking theory. Now, as the name implies, TG grammar is both transformational and generative. By transformation, what do you mean by transformation? To transform means to change. So, transformational and generative, what do you mean by generative capabilities? Coming up with some new words, right? So, generative is strongly linked to the process of creation. The ability to reproduce or to recreate or create, that is the meaning of generative, right? So as the name implies, transformational generative grammar is both about transformation, the changes that happen in a sentence, and also generation of a new sentence type. Through the application of certain rules called transformational rules or T rules, sentences are transformed from one type to another, and also new sentences are generated. So we apply certain rules, and these rules that we apply are called transformational rules or T rules. Remember, in phrase structure grammar, we dealt with phrase structure rules or PS rules, and in transformational generative grammar, we deal with transformational rules or T rules. And a sentence type is transformed into another sentence type, and new sentences are generated thus. Moving on to the next slide. Now, transformational generative grammar is based on the assumption that sentences are of two types. So when we talk about transformational generative grammar, we assume that sentences are of two types. Those with simpler structures are called basic or kernel sentences. Now, there are two types of sentences, as you know by now. One is simple, and the other is, there are three actually: simple, compound, and complex, right? So, when we talk about transformational generative grammar, it is based on the assumption that sentences are of two types. Those with simple structures are called basic or kernel sentences, and complex structures, those with complex structures which are derived from the basic or kernel sentences, is called transformations or transforms, right? Cool words to study. So those with simplest structures are called kernel sentences or basic sentences, like the kernel in a coconut, right? Those with simplest structures The kernel of a coconut is simple, quite simple, right? So those with the simplest structures are called basic or kernel sentences. And a kernel sentence is simple, assertive. Simple means it is not compound or complex. Assertive means it is not, on the one hand, you have assertive sentence, and on the other hand you have negative sentence, right? So kernel sentences are always simple, meaning they are not complex or compound. They are assertive, meaning they are not negative. They are declarative, meaning they are not asking any questions or they are not interrogatives. They are active, meaning they are not passive. So a kernel sentence is always simple, assertive, declarative and active in form. This is very important. An example would be John saw Mary. When you say John saw Mary, it is a kernel sentence. It's a basic sentence. It is a simple sentence. It is assertive. There is no negation in the sentence. John saw Mary. And it is declarative. And it's not asking any question, and it is in the active voice, right? John saw Mary. A person is saying John saw Mary, so it's in the active voice. Now, complex sentences are derived from the simple kernel form with the help of transformations. And when you derive complex sentences with the help of transformations, we call these complex sentences as transforms, right? Not transformations. In the previously I said transformations. So when complex sentences are derived from kernel forms or from basic forms with the help of transformations, they are called transforms. Example is Mary was seen by John. When you change the kernel sentence, John saw Mary, as Mary was seen by John, it becomes passive, right? So the transformation that happens here is that of passive transformation. Then the next one is, you can change this kernel sentence into a question or interrogative. From a declarative, you can change it into an interrogative. Like, did John see Mary? So by adding an auxiliary at the beginning and then writing the noun phrase and then coming up with a verb and then a noun phrase, it becomes an interrogative sentence, right? Did John see Mary is an interrogative sentence, and that has an auxiliary attached to it. Now, didn't John see Mary? That's it is an interrogative sentence because it's again a question, and it's also a negative because you have introduced the negated form or the negative form of did here, didn't. You have introduced didn't here. So didn't John see Mary is an interrogative negative sentence. So I hope that it was clear. That is, from this basic kernel sentence, by applying the rules of transformations, we can arrive at the complex structures called transforms. So TG grammar is based on this simple assumption that sentences are of two types: simple sentences, also known as kernels, and complex sentences, also known as transforms. And we saw how the transformation takes place, or what these transforms are called, right? In TG grammar, we start out with a kernel sentence. We start out with a simple sentence. So what happens in TG grammar is quite interesting. We start out with a simple, assertive, declarative, active form of a sentence, which is the kernel sentence, and we apply PS rules to it. Now, when you apply PS rules to any string of words or any sentence type, you will arrive at a PS string, right? So the PS string or deep structure thus obtained is converted into a surface structure by the means of T rules. That's what happens. So in TG grammar, we start with a kernel sentence to which PS rules are applied, and the PS string or deep structure thus obtained is converted into the surface structure by means of T rules. So when you unearth the deep structure, that is when you unearth the PS string, the phrase structure string, we convert it to the surface structure by applying T rules. I hope that it was clear. Let me illustrate it further with the help of another slide. Now this is what happens in TG grammar. There is a kernel sentence which is simple, assertive, declarative and active. That kernel sentence, to that kernel sentence we draw a phrase marker and we come up with the PS, we apply the PS rules and we get the deep structure, which is the PS string. Now to this PS string we apply transformation rules and then we reach the surface structure. Now PS string is somewhat similar to our terminal string, right? So PS string is somewhat similar. So deep structure, once you have applied all the PS rules, what you get is the deep structure of that sentence, the deep structure of a simple sentence. So from the deep structure of a simple, assertive, declarative, active sentence, when you apply T rules, we get the surface structure. So by applying T rules to John saw Mary, we may arrive at Mary was seen by John and did John see Mary. We'll just take a look at it, how it is done. We'll deal with it in detail through a video lecture. Now we shall move on again with the illustration. So there is a kernel sentence. We apply PS rules to the kernel sentence and we derive a deep structure or PS string, to which we apply T rules or transformation rules and we reach at a surface structure. This is how we do transformational generative grammar. This is how we analyze a sentence using transformational generative grammar. Now let's take a look at it. What are these transformations? Let's take a look at it. A sentence in the active voice can be converted to passive voice by applying the rules of passive transformation called T-passive. So, transformation passive, that's the meaning. So, a sentence in the active voice can be converted to a passive voice by applying the rule of passive transformation called T-passive. By applying a rule called negative placement or negation rule, an affirmative sentence can be transformed into a negative. So, by applying a rule called negative placement or negation rule, an affirmative sentence, a positive affirmative sentence can be transformed into a negative. So remember, when you change an active sentence into a passive sentence or an active voice into a passive voice, the transformation that occurs there is called T-passive or transformation passive. When we apply negation rules, the rule is called negative placement. So by the rule called negative placement or negation rule, an affirmative sentence can be transformed into a negative. Now TG grammar is capable of showing the interrelatedness between the sentences, isn't it? So by applying transformation rules to a PS string, you are reaching at a surface structure of a sentence. So we can undoubtedly say that TG grammar thus is capable of showing inter-sentence relationship, right? If this was an active voice sentence, first we apply PS rules and we arrive at a deep structure, PS string, and to that when we apply T rules, we arrive at a surface structure. The surface structure is a passive voice sentence. So TG grammar is able to show inter-sentence relationship, which all the grammars or all the methodologies that were applied hitherto by the linguist was not able to show. So for the first time, TG grammar was able to show inter-sentence relationships. That is why this is considered as an influential theory in linguistics. Now TG grammar is capable of showing interrelatedness between the sentence, and it explains the ambiguities also, and it is capable of producing all or any of the possible grammatical sentences of a language. So by using TG grammar, we are able to produce almost all or any of the possible grammatical sentences or utterances in a language. So it is an all-encompassing grammar. It's an all-encompassing kind of an analysis where we are able to show the interrelatedness between the sentences. We are able to explain the ambiguities, as well as we are able to show almost all possible grammatical sentences, how we arrive at all those grammatical sentences of a language. So that is what makes transformational generative grammar stand apart from all the other types of methodologies which were used by linguists earlier. Now we shall deal with transformational generative grammar. Transformational generative grammar in much more detail in the next class. But in today's class, I'll try to show a video on how you do transformational generative grammar if time permits. Okay, so thank you for listening. Take care.